The countries where military service is mandatory. Why is it mandatory? 1. They want a large standing army at all times. And forcing people to be soldiers is cheaper than paying people to be soldiers. 2. They want every man to have basic military training, in case some big war happens and everyone has to fight. I live in Switzerland where it is mandatory and I have no idea why. We're plus minus neutral, and if we get attacked, we have no chance with or without a military. Because of the instability of the region, won lives. Russia in my case. Fun fact: both South and North agreed on a ceasefire agreement, not a peace agreement, since the Korean War. Technically, we are still at war. PSI served in Korean Air Force for 2 years as a mandatory service. Russia at the border. We live right next to Russia. North Korea. For safety reason maybe? We have it in Vietnam since China is always up to no goods. Russia. Most military service lasts a year or two. If your country gets invaded, that's how much of a head start you have to mobilize your population. There's also an argument for military service as part of a state education to give all citizens the life skills that come with basic military training. In smaller countries that do not have a reserve of resources to create ammunition or other offensive weapons, having a population that all have military training is extremely useful if you need to defend your territory. Their strategy would basically be to overwhelm the enemy quickly with numbers rather than overtime. With offensive weapons, 3K trained and heavily armed soldiers can be repelled quickly by 6K lightly armed soldiers. This is especially effective in your own territory because of the numerous traps and defensive strongholds you can create in your own country. This is one reason why America had such a hard time in Vietnam. If you look at Israel as an example, their entire society is built on defense. Ever since the state was created, they've been threatened by their immediate neighbors. Military is ingrained into society, and part of that is mandatory service for a few years. The argument I have often heard here in Switzerland is that with the overall high level of education, quality of life, etc., very few people would choose to join the military. And the ones that would are probably not desirable. Instead, they get to leverage all the people having jobs outside the military. I'm from Austria, and everyone knows that our army can't do shit. They had an election about it, where women were allowed to vote and made up 60% of all people allowed to vote. Conscription is only for men. The outcome was that military service should be mandatory, and I've spent the last 6 months of my life being treated like shit. The main argument is always that the army also helps with stuff like earthquakes, mudslides and COVID, but that's just a small branch of the military. Also, the right-wing PSR ties seem to be more interested in conscription than the left. South Korea have it. It's probably because they border North Korea. Because the country I'm thinking of is small, in a conflict-ridden region, surrounded by countries that have attacked it in the past or are still actively hostile, and has disputed borders and ongoing military conflict. It just makes sense. Given those factors, without the military, the country couldn't continue to exist and civilian life would be over. Because they need to be protected but don't have the human resource to sustain a fully functioning army without mandatory military service. Greece used to have a 28-month mandatory military service in 1974-ish because of fears of a Turkish attack. Now it's much more humane at 9 to 12 months and a lot of time off. Turkey. We, Greece, have hostile relations since before nation-states times. Had a war around every 50 years since liberation in 1821. Had a close-to-war incidents every 5 to 10 years since the last war. Our neighbor is Russia.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Aircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.